Okay, so thank you all again for coming out and being here kind of later in the evening to learn about flowers and also now fungi. I'm Morgan, and today I'm going to be talking about fungi and if they are friend or foe. Okay, so we're going to go through a few different things today. First, kind of giving a general overview and introduction to fungi. There is so much to learn about fungi. I will only be scratching the surface. This is like an entire field of study. Mycologists do great work, so there's lots to learn, but we'll just be kind of going over the important basics. Then kind of the main part of this presentation, we're going to be talking about forest and fungi relationships and the friends and foes of that. And then finally, we'll be talking about some conclusions, what you can do to be a forest and fungi friend, and then additional materials that you can look into in your own time. Okay, so first, starting with the introduction. So first, what is a fungi? They are plant-like organisms. Originally, they were grouped into the same kingdom as plants, but they're actually very different. They lack roots, stems, leaves, flower, chlorophyll, and seeds. So they, after they were doing more research and looking into fungi, they realized that they are completely different, and now they are classified in their own kingdom. So fungi are spore-producing eukaryotic organisms that are typically filamentous in growth. So they produce spores as their main method of reproduction, and they're also eukaryotic organisms, so different from like bacteria in the way that they have membrane-bound cells and organelles and a nucleus, and they're filamentous in growth, so they kind of have like these webby structures that go underground, and then also that extends into their fruiting body. Another important thing that distinguishes fungi is that they have chitin in their cell walls. So this provides strength and support for these organisms as they're made up of mostly water. So this chitin is the same material that's found in the hard exoskeleton of insects. So it's really strong material. So when you think of fungi, you're most commonly thinking of the macrofungi, the fungi that you see as you're walking around in the forest. So two lineages of fungi actually produce the fungi that we can see in the forest. So I know this picture is a little bit small, but this is kind of a simplified lineage of fungi. So as you can see here, the animals are most closely related to all of these fungi. They diverge over here. Then you have the chytrids, the zygomycota, the glomeromycota, and then the two macro fungi here, which are basidiomycota and ascomycota. So looking first at basidiomycota, these are also called the club fungi. And this is because the spores are born on a club, which it looks like a club. So looking over here at this basidiocarp, or the fruiting structure of the basidiomycota, this is kind of like a cross-section of the gills. And if you zoom in really close, this would be a microscopic look at the gills. You can see the mycelium structure and then the little clubs where the four spores come off, and then they are released into the air, and then the spores can go on to reproduce. And then here, the ascomycota, they're also known as the sac fungi because their spores are in this enclosed casing. So here we have a cup fungi, and then the little spore casings, and then the spores will be ejected out into the air where they can go on to reproduce. So a big question, are all fungi mushrooms? I know as we walk around in the forest, we're like, oh, there's a mushroom, but the truth is most fungi are not mushrooms. There are so many different fungal forms. You have crust and mold, mildew and yeast. There's club fungi and coral fungi. There's earth balls and puff balls. You have carbon fungi. There's also jelly fungi. These are my favorite. They're called jelly babies. You also have gilled mushrooms. There's fungi with pores, fungi with teeth, and so many more. So there's a super diverse forms of fungi, not just mushrooms. Mushrooms are only the ones with gills, as you can see here.
Say that again, mushrooms are only the ones with gills?
That's right, yes. So they're only a super small subsection of all of the fungi that exist. Yes, so looking at how fungi reproduce. First, looking here, this is a super great image of microscopic images of spores. So they come in lots of different shapes, from super small and spiny to these long septate fusiform spores. So as this mature fruiting body releases the spores, they're able to land in the soil, and then they germinate when conditions are right. So if there's moisture and food present. And when those conditions occur, they're able to start growing these hyphae, which grow into this web-like structure of mycelium. And if two spore hyphae meet, they can mate and form this mycelial web, which then feeds on the nutrients in the soil, and then they can form into a tight structure, which begins to form this fruiting body. And as it matures, it will release spores and start the cycle over again. And this is just the generalized reproduction structure of mushrooms. There's lots of different kind of reproductive life cycles that different fungi experience. So this is just like the main one for macrofungi here. So how do fungi flourish? This is a really great question, and there are actually 4 main ways of how fungi are able to receive their nutrients. First, looking at saprophytic, this is the largest group of macrofungi that we see walking around in the forest, and they're also super important because they're the ones that are helping to break down and recycle dead plant and animal material. If we didn't have them, there would be piles and piles of logs in the forest, and that nutrient would be locked up in those dead plants and animal material. So they're able to break those materials down by releasing enzymes, and these enzymes are very powerful and can break down really tough materials like cellulose that are found in trees. And they break these materials down into simple soluble compounds that they can absorb and then use as nutrients. We also have parasitic relationships. So this is a relationship in which the parasitic fungi basically exploits the host. So the host is being either harmed or even killed by this parasitic infection by the fungi. And hosts can be a wide range of organisms, from other fungi to plants to insects and even humans. So this image right here is a picture of lobster fungi. And I wanted to include this because I thought it was really interesting kind of concept of fungi parasitizing another fungi. So this starts out as a lactarious mushroom that is just pretty common mushroom, but it's inedible and actually toxic. If you eat it, it can make your stomach really sick. But then this other fungi comes and parasitizes this mushroom, and it grows all over the surface and has the mycelium spread inside, and it completely changes the look of the mushroom, the texture, and also the chemical compounds inside, and it turns it into this mushroom that's actually a super choice edible for people to eat. So it turns it into this really cool thing that is super delicious to a lot of people. Other examples of parasitic relationships are on plants that we'll talk more about later, but also insects. I don't know if you guys have heard of the show The Last of Us. It's a pretty popular show the past few years that kind of explored the idea of fungi parasitizing humans, but this came from the idea that is very real of fungi parasitizing insects, where they are able to infect the body of, say, like an ant, and it's able to take control of their brain, and they find a high location where then the fungi is able to produce a fruiting body out of like the top of their head, and then it releases spores into the wind. It's a really interesting concept, but that is very real, and that's what the show's based off of. Yeah, of course.
So those are chanterelles?
No, these are lobster mushrooms. These are, different from chanterelles. Chanterelles are edible on their own without any parasitism.
So the lobster mushroom starts out toxic.
That's right, yes. And then it becomes edible after this parasitism relationship.
So how will you know? The color change?
Yeah, so these are normally like white mushrooms, and then when this fungus parasitizes it, it changes it to this bright orange color and also has like this kind of bumpy texture on it. So it's like completely different and pretty unique, yeah. Yeah, very awesome. And then another example of human and fungi parasitic relationships, we all know athlete's foot, that's a fungus parasitizing humans, but other infections that can be fatal to humans are involved with like heart and lungs infections. So that's a lot of different examples in there, but all very diverse and interesting to think about. Another really important group that we'll also be talking more about later is the mycorrhizal fungi. So this is a symbiotic relationship between fungi and the roots of the host plant. So symbiotic means both parties are benefiting from this relationship. So the plants are able to photosynthesize, and they're providing sugars and carbons to the fungi in the root system, and the fungi are able to pull water and limiting nutrients like nitrogen from the soil and supply that to the trees. So in this group, there are two different kinds of mycorrhizal fungi. There's arbuscular and ectomycorrhizal, which we'll be talking about more. But this is a super important group of fungi relating to plants and trees in the forest. Finally, we have our endophytes, and these are symptomless internal inhabitants of plant tissue. So it's similar to fungi parasitizing plants, but in this case, there is no harm done to the host. They just kind of live there, they're coexisting. So this is an interesting group of fungi, as many of these endophytic fungi are implicated in the production of antibiotics and other compounds that have therapeutic uses, such as modern-day penicillin. Penicillin is an endophyte in that it can grow inside of plant tissue, so like inside of their stems and leaves and the flowers. Although penicillin can also grow in other habitats, such as like indoor and on food. So these groups of fungi are often very easy to cultivate on like petri dishes and in the lab, which is what this picture is showing here. And these are really important for plants because they're actually able to help protect plants from pathogens. So that's a really great relationship in that aspect. So continuing on, we're going to now talk more about forest and fungi relationships. And we are going to start out with friendships. So as I was discussing earlier, there are two kinds of mycorrhizal fungi. You have the arbuscular or endomycorrhizal and the ectomycorrhizal fungi. So looking at arbuscular or endomycorrhizal, these are the fungi that are able to penetrate plant cells. So looking at this image over here, the fungi are growing on this root tip with the root hairs, so where the nutrient uptake happens. They're able to go into the plant cells and create these like tree-like structures where nutrient exchange between the fungi and plant are able to happen. This is a very common relationship between fungi and plants that happens in a lot of different species of herbaceous plants like grasses. And then we also have ectomycorrhizal, which is the association of fungi and plant cells where the fungi are growing in between the plant cells, so they're not going inside, but the nutrient exchange is able to happen through diffusion of cell walls, and both parties are still able to share their nutrients. And this is a very diverse group of fungi, and also super important for tree species. And in these tree families, it's most important for the pines, the oaks, the birches, and also another group that has trees like sourwood. Okay, so looking at mycorrhizal networks, we know now that mycorrhizal networks or mycorrhizal fungi are able to have these relationships between the fungi and the trees where they're sharing nutrients. So we can see this image here. These are two pine seedlings where the yellowish, darker section is the pine roots, and then all of the webby white structure is the mycorrhizal fungi growing around them, and the pines and the fungi are able to share nutrients. But additionally, these fungi are creating a bridge between these two trees and connecting them. So the trees are now also connected and can share nutrients through this network and also communicate through this network, which is super interesting, and kind of recent studies are showing this really great relationship. So looking at this image here, the dark circles represent hub trees of a forest. So hub trees are the largest, tallest, oldest trees that are able to get the most sunlight, and they're producing the most nutrients from the energy they're getting from the sun. And they have all of these connections to the smaller trees in the forest. And this is a really great way to help the smaller trees, especially the seedlings, because as these seedlings are growing in the forest, they're not getting a lot of light, so they're not able to produce a lot of food. So these hub trees, since they have a lot of excess nutrients, they can send it to these seedlings through this mycorrhizal network, so the whole forest is able to help grow together. And this is really great work that has been done by Susan Simard, which I will talk more about at the end, some additional resources, but she's a really great scientist that has done a lot of leading work in this field. Another important thing to think about is with these mycorrhizal networks, inoculating soils with mycorrhizal fungi can really help improve the chance that seedlings that you're planting are able to survive, as they're able to, with this fungi that you're inoculating with, they're able to connect to other trees and help get that nutrients that they need that they might not get otherwise. So now looking into the forest foes. First, looking at the chestnut blight. This is a really important fungal disease that has spread throughout the East Coast and the entire range of the chestnut trees. So before this blight, these trees were prominent all over the East Coast, and they were really important to the indigenous people that were here before us. So these trees kind of coexisted with the indigenous people. They were able to provide important nutrient-dense chestnuts that the indigenous people relied on, and in turn, they would help cultivate and care for these trees. When settlers came over from Europe, they quickly discovered that the chestnuts were valuable for their rot-resistant wood, which they would turn into lumber and use for building and creating furniture and lots of different things. And they were harvesting these trees pretty quickly. And also the nutrient-dense chestnut, we know, is also symbolic of a lot of the holiday season. You hear in songs, roasting chestnuts by an open fire. So this is also important culturally. And then with the introduction of the blight from Asia, this fungus spread throughout the entire range of chestnuts in about 50 years, which is very quick for a fungus to spread throughout the entire East Coast. And this disease rendered these trees functionally extinct. So what this means is as the disease affects these trees, it's affecting the bark and cambium layers, which the cambium layer is the growth layer of the tree. So as it affects this, the trunk of the tree is killed, but not the roots. So shoots are still able to come up from the ground, but as soon as the tree starts to get bigger and the bark expands, it cracks and lets in the fungus, which kind of repeats the cycle of trunk dying. So these trees aren't able to reach reproductive maturity. So this is why you can still see chestnut trees in the wild, but they're just going to be these tiny little trees that are just the size of your thumb. So that is why they're functionally extinct. But there is hope for the American chestnut, because the American Chestnut Foundation, which is actually headquartered in Asheville, which is really great, they're doing lots of work to kind of help bring these trees back. And they're doing this work by trying to hybridize the American chestnut with the Chinese chestnut, which actually co-evolved with this disease, so they're naturally resistant. So they're trying to figure out how they can create these hybrids to repopulate the range of the chestnut. So we're going to look at a quick video that shows how this disease quickly spread throughout the United States. You can see that this is the native range, and it starts up in the Northeast in the late 1800s and begins to spread, and this spread happens very quickly, and by the time of 1950, it has infected the entire range, which it still continues to affect today. Okay, next, looking at beech bark disease. Oh, yes, sorry.
Just one point for us that work at the cradle and people who will come around. We have one of the hybrids next to the activity building.
Yes, I did see that.
Okay, and then there's also one over by the pond. And there's another one somewhere, I can't remember where.
Yeah, it's really great to see chestnut trees kind of trying to come back with the hybrids.
Good size.
Yeah, they're really beautiful too. So looking at beech bark disease, this is an insect and fungus complex, so insects and fungus working together. So the beech scale will infest beech trees and introduce cracks into the trunk, which allows the invasion of these fungal pathogens to enter, which then results in the death of the trunk. Although the roots are still surviving, so they're able to produce these suckers, which are like little propagations from the root. And these result in a thick understory growth, which this is an important disease because it's not only killing the trees, but it's also limiting diversity in forests. As these dense thickets of suckers grow, it prevents other important plants of the forest to grow in place. So we're losing mature beech nut producing trees, which are really important food sources for lots of different animals, and also limiting diversity, which is why this is an important disease to talk about. Another thing to note, these orange spots that you're seeing on the tree are actually the fruiting body of the fungus, which you could also see in the chestnuts, the chestnut blight. Okay, so finally, talking about some conclusions from all this. Where would we be without fungi? Well, we wouldn't have any fungal diseases affecting our trees or affecting humans or our important crops that we have. But it also begs the question, would we still have trees? Since fungi and trees form such close associations, it's really hard to tell if without fungi, if they would even be able to survive. We also have to ask the question, would we have the crops to feed the population that is on Earth? Not just looking at the ectomycorrhizal fungi that are supporting trees, but also the arbuscular ones that are supporting lots of the crops that we need to support our population. So fungi are essential to life. They're essential especially to plant life, which we've talked about, and plant life is at the bottom of the food pyramid, the food chain, so everything else relies on these plants. And if we don't have the plant life and fungi associations, animals are relying on plants, so they're suffering as well. And humans also rely on fungi, and not just relying on plants, but also thinking about different kinds of fungi like yeast. We rely on yeast to make lots of bread that has been important to feed people for thousands and thousands of years, and also looking at brewing yeast, which has provided the things we need to drink. Before we had technology to purify water, we used wine and beer to supply lots of clean drinking water for people. So fungi are providing crucial functions in our ecosystems while also providing food and also medicine like penicillin, and also bioremediation. Bioremediation with fungi is really important because fungi, if you put them in soils of contaminated soils like in mine areas, they're able to absorb the toxic heavy metals, which is able to then help prepare the soil to be replanted and then regenerated for that area that was once uninhabitable by a lot of different species. So we need fungi for lots of different reasons. So overall, fungi are our friend. So how can you be a friend to the forest and the fungi? So first, starting in your own backyard, you can avoid over-tilling areas which would disturb the mycelium networks that grow in the soil. Also minimizing fertilizer and pesticide use. So these chemicals can harm the fungal networks in the ground and prevent them from growing and helping the plants that they associate with. You can also plant native species. We learned from Libby that native species are really great for pollinators, but they're also really great for fungal connections. You can also be a fungal friend in the forest and in natural areas by following a lot of the leave no trace principles. So staying on trail to help prevent compaction of soils, which limits mycelial growth. You can also help protect them by not digging or disturbing the soil, and also leaving what you find, because a lot of the material on the ground is important fungi food. Also, in your community, you can be helpful by first going to education events like this. So you're already being a fungi friend. But there's lots of other opportunities to go into the community to learn more about fungi in particular, or other fungi-related things like helping forests more specifically. You can also, if you feel like really passionate about fungi, you can join mycological societies where you go out and learn more about fungi, and you can do forays, and it can be a really fun event. And you can also volunteer in the community. This is a really great way to get involved and actually making a tangible way to help the forest and the fungi. And a great organization in the community is actually the Pisgah Conservancy. They have lots of volunteering opportunities, as well as getting involved with Find. So lots of great organizations to look into to make a difference in your community. So finally, talking about some additional resources, some great books. First, looking at Suzanne Simard's Finding the Mother Tree. This was who I was talking about previously, who did a lot of work with the hub trees or the mother trees and looking into those mycelial connections throughout the forest. Also, Paul Stamets' Mycelium Running is a great look into mycoremediation of areas that have been degraded either by human means or other things, and how fungi can kind of be the cure to those situations. Other online resources, North Carolina Native Plant Society. This would be a great resource for looking at things that you can grow in your garden. Also tying back to Libby's presentation, there's lots of information on flowers there, so you can create a pollinator garden and also help the fungi in your yard. They also have different chapters around the state, so if you want to join a specific chapter, they have an Asheville one that's relatively close. They do lots of events and education activities. There's also mushroomexpert.com, which is a great resource for mycological information and also learning how to identify mushrooms by using dichotomous keys. So that's a really great resource and also free. And then finally, iNaturalist.org, which is an online website and also an app on your phone, which uses citizen science. So you can go out and take pictures of basically anything you see. So plants, insects, animals, trees, anything, fungi. And you can upload it to this cloud where people all over can help you identify what that is that you're seeing. And then scientists can also use this information gathered by the community to do their own research. So lots of great resources to look into if you'd like. But I've got some works cited. And I also wanted to just thank you all for being here. We worked really hard on these presentations, and we hope you all learned something from this. But yes, thank you.